Hello and welcome! I really enjoyed the Harry Potter Game Boy Color games. They were my introduction to RPGs and eventually led me down the decade-long obsession with the Pokemon series. However, my next Harry Potter game was on the PlayStation 2, and I wouldn't play another portable Harry Potter game until the DS with Goblet of Fire, which I feel is a bit of a shame since Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is the last RPG Harry Potter game, and honestly, it looks promising. Today's video is sponsored by 16-Bit Store. At 16-Bit, we pride ourselves in our designs and the quality of our printed products, from our display stands to our styluses, our cases, shells, and more. Explore our selection at 16bitstore.com today and get 15% off your next order with offer code 16bitreview when you order 2 or more items. From what footage I've seen online about the Game Boy Advance Prisoner of Azkaban, it appears to be an updated version of the Game Boy Color games, with some improved visuals. But after picking the game up and blitzing through the tutorial dungeon, I noticed a very interesting change in the gameplay. While the overworld in the previous games were merely a maze to go through, sometimes literally, at the Prisoner of Azkaban it feels more like a platforming section that you would find at the console games, complete with jumping and exploration. I personally welcomed this change, as the dungeons were a bit lifeless in the Game Boy Color titles. But after looking into it a little more, it appears that this new change might have been more of a balancing act, since the Harry Potter games, unbeknownst to me, were also available on Game Boy Advance, and those games were not RPGs, but platformers. And while I personally haven't played these games, so I don't know how Prisoner of Azkaban stacks up to them, I will say that it is a welcome change here, since the dungeons feel a lot more dynamic than they did in comparison to the static nature of the Game Boy Color titles. But that's not all. In the overworld, you also have swappable characters, much like the mainline console games. And yes, each character does have their own unique set of skills and spells, which thankfully don't clutter up the UI like it did before. Plus, the castle has been upgraded immensely to feel more in line with the console games. While normally I would celebrate a more detailed castle for me to explore, I feel a bit sad since I think that this decision was outside of the developer's choice, since I see a lot of mementos of the older castle's design tucked away in unnoticeable areas, like the specific location of the hospital wing and the dual floors of the library, along with the Egyptian artifacts on the 7th floor. And there are more little changes like this that are scattered throughout the entire game, like the hidden secret items that you find within the nooks and crevices of the dungeons as you explore. They've all been replaced by chests like they do in the console titles. The observatory is just completely missing, and secret passages that would spit you out in seemingly random places throughout the castle are now just a glorified elevator system that leads you directly to the ground floor. While none of this is technically bad, it doesn't really detract from the game itself. Honestly, in some ways, someone might find it an improvement. There were times, though, that I personally would just wish that I was exploring a castle that was as chaotic or as flushed out as it was in the previous games. But despite this game being bigger overall, the game weirdly feels smaller too, since there's no real reason for you to actually explore every nook and cranny of a dungeon. The shadow story doesn't really help here too, and while it's no different from the past games, it has more of the movie's plots than the console games at times, but I feel it could have been better. Or at least it's something other than making Draco the final boss. I mean, come on, even the PS2 game got that right. But despite all of my gripes, I can't ignore what this game does well. And out of the 3 RPG Harry Potter games, this is the best. For starters, the game tells you what status effects a spell or a spell attack does. Spell level ups are awarded during combat, making their progression clear as day, and you get to see how effective a spell is after you investigated a creature. Honestly, with these improvements alone to the combat, it makes the game better than anything that came prior, just by default. Let alone the inclusion of seeing which enemies you're about to fight in the overworld after you've observed all of the creatures that are fighting in it. In fact, it's really easy to figure out which battle you want to take, since if you want to scan a specific enemy, you just look for the clouds rather than the specific enemies wandering in the overworld. Overall, while I do have a nostalgic sweet spot for the Chamber of Secrets on the Game Boy Color, I have to admit, with all these quality of life updates, The Prisoner of Azkaban is the better game overall. Unless you want to gnome a garden or play some Quidditch, in which case, Chamber of Secrets all the way. So that was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban for the Game Boy Advance. And while I did have some issues with it, it's a fine addition to the Harry Potter RPG games. Sure, it's not as good as the other RPGs that were coming out at the time, like Pokemon, but for what it is, it's not a bad purchase. I just would have loved to see more games like this come out for the Harry Potter series, but as the new games are being made and developers were changed around, EA doubled down on its action front for the portable games, which I feel is a bit of a shame because for what it is, I highly recommend this game. But anyways, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you have yourself a good day, and as always, take care.